How is everyone? Excellent. And of course you can hear me. Well, it's my great pleasure here today to introduce the presidents of the two largest member societies, amateur radio organizations in IARU Region 2. And first off, we've got Phil McBride, not a stranger to anyone here, president of RAC. He's in his second year as president of RAC. Before that, 6 years on the RAC board as the director of Ontario South. He's from Halton Hills, Ontario. Where exactly is Halton Hills? That doesn't matter. Licensed in 1994, and his primary interests are field and emergency communications, and he's very involved with CFARS. And of course, a lot of his spare time is now taken up with RAC business. That and operating from Panama, I understand. So, second is Rick Roderick, K5UR, and he said K5UR stands for Unlimited Radiation. So I think the FCC is going to have to check his amplifier. But anyway, he's president of ARRL for 7 years now. That's not a, how can I put it? That's got to be a stressful job. So, challenging, there we go. 31 years on the board of the ARRL. That right there is a lot of dedication. And he's had 56 years as an ARRL volunteer. So that's outstanding, really quite something. Rick is from Arkansas, or Arkansas, as some people call it. That's a joke. I guess Canadians don't get that joke. He's licensed in 1967, is into DXing and contesting, married to Holly, 2 kids and 1 grandchild. And Holly's not licensed, but apparently knows more about amateur radio through osmosis than most of us here know. So anyway, my great pleasure introduce you gentlemen. So, would you like the mic?
Thank you very much, Al. I stuck Al with that introduction because he's the regional director for Atlantic Canada, and I figure he may as well get her done. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. This is the first time Radio Amateurs of Canada as a board and executive have gotten together since the pandemic. Traditionally, we get together in person once every 2 years to do planning meetings, because it's nice to get everyone in a room together and to discuss what's happened the previous 2 years and to make plans for events going forward. And although we are able to do things virtually through COVID-19, nothing beats being in a room together and being able to go out in the hallway afterwards and have a coffee or a beer and talk about what needs to happen. And since RAC is responsible for so many things involving the amateur radio service, it's a vital part of what we do. So I will pass it over to my friend Rick here to talk about bring his greetings from the ARRL.
Okay, thank you, Phil, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see everybody here, and understand we've got a YouTube channel going, so welcome to those watching on YouTube. On behalf of the American Radio Relay League, I'd like to say a thank you for the invitation here and the wonderful hospitality that we've encountered from everyone here and around Halifax. I want to congratulate RAC on its 30th year anniversary. I mentioned in the RAC biennial meeting that I was able to attend the last couple of days that RAC and ARRL share common objectives and responsibilities for amateur radio, and we have a close relationship, and I hope that continues for many years to come as we further our responsibility to make amateur radio great and make sure it's sustained for the next generation. But I'd like to extend a warm thank you and greetings from the ARRL Board of Directors, our headquarters staff, and all of our members. It's been a real pleasure to be here and participate in the RAC events and the biennial and the AGM later today, Phil, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. So just a little bit of a history lesson for those who might not know, and because it is RAC's 30th anniversary, it bears repeating for those who do. Radio Amateurs of Canada was formed in 1933 from 2 organizations, the Canadian Amateur Radio Federation and the Canadian Radio Relay League. One of the reasons that Rick is here today, and one of the reasons that you see pictures of me going to Connecticut twice a year, and before me, Glenn and Jeff, is that the CRRL, when it was formed off of the ARRL Canada section, the presidents of each organization were invited as observers to the board and planning meetings of the other organization. So when the ARRL has their board meetings twice a year in Connecticut, a representative from RAC, usually the president, myself, as well as the president from the IRU, and most of us know who Tim Ellum is, V6SH, the president, will go attend their meetings. And we've, since RAC's board meetings are held bi-monthly online, and we do our planning meetings every 2 years, we invite the president of the ARRL to come up for that event. And the great thing about both events is that even though we're close together, there are significant differences between Canada and the United States culturally in the amateur service, but there are also a lot of similarities. And we're able to use the experiences of each organization and the volunteers and staff of each organization to help each other out. It is fairly often that we are consulting with people within the ARRL, what's going on down there? And likewise, and you might not think it happens very often, but just as often you have people from the United States calling us saying, we're seeing this happen down here. What are you guys doing up there? So it's a collaborative relationship that I value, and I think it's a very valuable thing to Radio Amateurs of Canada and to the amateur radio service here. So that's just a bit of a history lesson. We're here to take questions from anyone who wants to ask questions about RAC or the ARRL or the amateur radio service in either country. To those of you watching online, I've got my phone on my knee, so if you see me looking at my phone, I'm looking at the live chat. So if you're out there and you have a question, feel free to ask, and I'll say it here. And if we get a question from the audience, we'll just repeat it so that everyone on YouTube can hear the question. So we're here for you, so you ask us anything you like, within reason. Al.
The ARRL certainly has filed a response and an initial response, and filed a. Let me turn that on again. I knew I wasn't loud when I couldn't hear my echo. Got to get loud. The ARRL did file a response, and an aggressive one that was highly technical in nature. If you happen to see it, the league's lab spent a great number of hours establishing the technical background for that paper. And just, I believe, the day before yesterday, we filed a reply to the responses that had gone in initially in the first round, and so we expect to fight that all the way. And I've had a lot of questions about that, but we'll have to wait and see. Of course, the FCC, sometimes they move fast on things, sometimes they move slow. We've got 6 or 7 items before the FCC that have been sitting there for 7, 8, and 9 years. So. But this one, that from a practical standpoint, that concerns me is that I suspect it's got a lot of money behind it, and so, but that may, I don't know, maybe there's some people who influence that to move it along quicker, but they can't get around the fact that there's going to be a lot of response that's going to counter what they want in that petition. So we're hopeful the FCC will not go any further with it and dismiss it.
So just quickly to the YouTube audience. And we'll make sure that we repeat the questions in the audience going forward. The question was from Al Penny of UNO about there was a proposal, a white paper going around the United States about a resurgence of HF using extremely high power stations for transmission of data, and there's been concerns from the amateur community about potential interference on our bands. And Al's question to Rick was about the ARRL's position in response to that. So that's the answer. Are there any other questions? So actually, I'll ask you a question and I know the answer, but I think everyone would like to know. The FCC put out a request for comment about 60 meters. Canada, just so you know, in Canada, RBR4, the latest copy was adopted last July, which gave us the new 15 kilohertz segment in the middle by channel 4. We retained the other 4 channels, and we've actually managed to keep the 100-watt EIRP limit across the entire band. So, but the FCC did put out a request for comment about what's going to go on in the U.S. And I was just wondering what's going on with that down there.
Yeah, we're in that in waiting mode right now. You know, we filed our initial petition with that, and the only concern I think we've got is that we'd like to keep all those channels in addition to, you know, the segment. In other words, have what y'all have. So hopefully that'll come about. Although we recognize, I get this question a lot about 60 meters, is when are we going to count DX contacts there for awards and things like that, and we're not I don't anticipate a change in that direction at all. We still, from what we understand, is a very sensitive band segment that's used by government entities, and so we've got to behave ourselves on those frequencies as to power and interference and so forth. So I think it's great if we can get a segment, you know, but we'd also like to keep all those channels, and the way they've got it proposed now is we'd lose one of those channels, so hopefully we'll be able to get that turned around.
Right, very cool. I got a question here from VE3WY. Since EM waves don't respect national boundaries, how can FCC license these Asia stations without consulting globally? That's a great question. I don't think either of us are the people who are answer that question. David, I would recommend that you send an email to RAC's Regulatory Affairs Specialist, Dave, VE3KG, and you can email him at regulatory@rac.ca. However, keep in mind that there are from what I understand, Serge, correct me if I'm wrong, but based on what we discussed yesterday, we all agree to certain band rules at the international level, but every country has their own sovereign right to do whatever they want at the end of the day. It's by collaboration amongst all the entities to make sure everyone plays nice, and I'm confident that that's going to continue to be the case, as it has been for the past 125 years of radio. Serge. Come here. Come here, Serge. We can do this.
Yeah, Serge, VA3SB. You're absolutely right, but even though a country has a sovereign right to do it, the one thing they cannot do is adversely affect neighboring administrations. So whatever they do, they can do within their own country. That gets a little difficult with HF, as we probably know. So thank you.
So with that in mind, I think we can say with some confidence that whatever happens down there isn't going to adversely affect everyone else. So let's just keep our eye on the ball. Yes, sir. So V3QD Scott here in the audience was asking Rick, V1, sorry, I'm sorry, it's just habits. And good for you, lucky you. V1QD Scott is asking Rick about what the ARRL is doing to engage schools and such. Rick, go ahead.
Well, that's a great point, and in fact, we could probably spend the rest of the hour talking about something that a number of the RAC board has already heard me get on my soapbox about, and that's the future of this hobby and the age demographics, things like that. Well, I'll mention that more in a minute. But if you were to pick up QST over the last couple of years in our other periodicals, you will see a great number, I would say the overall percentage of times, like on the cover and featured in a lot of the articles, things about youth and that younger generation and STEM. We have targeted that as a major initiative going forward in trying to find what it takes to attract that, what I call the next generation, that younger generation. We've got the college initiative, which sometimes I don't think we talk as much about, but we've got a network with our college stations around the United States that seems to grow. It's growing, but slowly. We've got, I think, probably the greatest thing we've got for one of the youth initiatives is our Teacher Institute. We have Steve Goodgame, K5ATA at ARRL headquarters, that runs a Teachers Institute where we bring teachers in and teach them about ham radio. Then they take that back out into the schools. It's been a remarkable program. Of course, you know, we're involved with our ARIS and those groups as well. So we've targeted that as a major initiative, and it's successful. We see recruiting efforts improving out there with that younger generation. But the problem that I see from where I sit a lot of times when I see those success stories is, what does it look like a year or two later? You know, I was quoting a figure to the RAC board the other day that we did a study of our technicians, which oftentimes are the younger generation, that youth group getting in that beginner's license. You know, the technician, I don't know if y'all are familiar with it, but it's the beginner's license in the States. And 51% of the hams in the United States are technicians. They're not like me. You know, they don't care about DX and contesting necessarily, but 51%. Now, a great number of those are the youth population and the next generation. And you may think, well, that's great, but our study, though, indicated that out of that 51%, only 7% of them are league members. Now that bothers me greatly, and we've tried to figure out why is that. You know, does that? And we hear everything from, well, that younger generation, they're not joiners. You know, they've got all their other things they do too. A lot of different things may come into play in that regard. But then also we got to studying about these new technicians, and whether or not they're really active after a certain period of time. And we found an alarming figure that, based on the survey we did with these technicians, 3/4 of the technicians that got their license, you know, in the last year, they're inactive. They're inactive. And so that's a real problem, because I think a good number of those technicians obviously are that younger generation. So we're working to try to find out. And if you notice, some of the motions passed by the ARRL Board of Directors in the last couple of meetings that we've had have been directives for headquarters staff to initiate things that would target technicians and that younger generation to help enhance their operating abilities and capabilities to retain them. So my point is, recruiting is one thing, but retention is also a problem that we've got. You know, another example that I'll use, the ARRL has got 30,000 volunteer examiners. 30,000. That's a huge number. So all year long, 30,000 of our VEs are touching people out there, you know. And my question to them, the challenge has been, what are you doing before they walk out that door after you congratulate them for getting their license? Hey, you're a technician holder now. But have you told them where their local club is? Have you told them what you're going to do for them to make sure they stay in the hobby? You know, I mean, that's a big factor. And so I think clubs is another issue we ought to talk about too, because clubs are dying. That's a pretty broad statement, isn't it? Some clubs are not, but many clubs. Do y'all know some clubs that have gone away before COVID, since COVID hit? Absolutely. We hear this all the time. People don't go to clubs as much as they used to. Well, clubs are where you get that younger generation, if you can get them to come. I'll tell you all a quick story, since I think we've got time. Okay, this is a story close to my heart that illustrates to me the importance of clubs and how important they are with that younger generation today. When I started out as a ham, I was just a teenager, snot-nosed kid, okay? And I wanted to get into ham radio because I couldn't believe that I could talk in my little old small town at the foot of the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas, little old small town, that a boy from his bedroom could talk around the world on a radio. And I had to become a ham radio operator, okay? Now, the local club, we weren't in a large town. The local club only had probably 7 or 8 active members. But I'd ride my bicycle down to the county courthouse for the monthly meeting. And I'd go up there and meet these old guys like all of us are now, frankly, you know. Now, what did they do? They say, oh, he's that teenage kid. We don't have time for him. I've known some clubs that are that way, okay? I bet you have too. This club, though, they took me in. They took me, they put me up on their shoulders, you know, and they carried me. That's the way I like to look at it. And they taught me how to operate. They taught me about ham radio. They took care of me. They followed me as I grew up, and they followed me as I went off to college, and they followed me as I became an adult and I moved away. But they still checked on me because I knew they did, because I heard people telling me that they were asking how I was doing, things like that. Okay? In other words, they made an investment in me. Now, do y'all's clubs do that? I don't know. Maybe you should. So, with your point is excellent. It goes to that concern I've got is, where's our next generation? And what are we all doing? Every one of us has a responsibility for that next generation. And I do this all the time, too, when I'm with groups like this, to say, I did it the other day to y'all. Anybody in here less than 20 years old? Nope. Anybody in here that's crowded here that I see less than 30 years old? Nope. Anybody in here less than 40? Nope.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Where's Adam? He's back there. He's 39, but just about to hit 40. Well, y'all see my point. I'm almost ashamed to, but might be ashamed to even say how many are less than 50 in here. Be good to see the YouTubers' response, too, that are listening to this. But that's my point is, what are we doing today to get that youth? And ARRL is working like we're firing on all cylinders trying to, where's that sweet spot? And one last thing about the youth, another thing, too, talking about recruiting and retention, and this is something I think we all need to look at, and as far as going out there and attracting people, is that I've been told from a number of VEs that look at this more carefully nowadays that we should be trying to attract those people who are like 35 to 40 years old. That those are people who have gone, they've matured, they've got a family now, maybe have a little more money, that kind of thing, and they're looking to get into something like MCOM, for example, okay? And so maybe we need to shift and focus on some recruiting efforts, you know, with that demographic too, that could help us out and expand the hobby. Because if y'all ever look at an age demographic chart, there's a big bubble at about what, y'all? 65 to 70 years old, and there's not much behind it. And we're all dying off. So 10 years from now, I wonder what the landscape's going to look like. All the more important to focus on you. That ought to be the number one priority that we have right now, is making sure there's a next generation sitting where y'all are 100 years from now.
You had somebody in the organization, a woman named Johnson, who was working in education. I don't know if she's still there.
No, that's Steve Goodgame is the person. And if you got any ideas, or if any club here wants a resource, in other words, pick our brains on things that we're doing, then get a hold of Steve Goodgame, K5ATA at ARRL headquarters, and he'll help you any way he can.
And you were publishing a newsletter called Making Waves.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's on the air. It's a kind of a new beginners magazine, and I love it. Even though I still look at the articles in it and learn stuff from it, and it's basic stuff. It's great, and it's targeted for that new ham.
What's the magazine called?
Hmm?
What's the magazine called?
What?
On the Air? Is that what it?
Yeah, on the air.
So,
On the air. On the air.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. I mean, I'll dovetail on that, RAC. I mean, we're close enough that we have the same issues, and we are, RAC as an organization is well aware of this. So we are working on youth. We actually brought on a new youth coordinator just before these meetings began. His name is Phil Gebhardt, VE3ACK. He's a retired teacher. He is actually working to develop the basic courses in both of Canada's official languages, and he has been active in getting kids in front of equipment, building things. So his input is going to be well received. And then, of course, as most people know, we finished the Youth on the Air Region 2 camp at Carleton University just last month. I got to go and attend the opening of that, and there were eight kids there. And of those 8 kids, I gave 4 of them their exams over COVID, because we were able to do remote exams, and all the 4 of them were like, "I know you." Yep. I gave you your ticket. So we are, it is something that is front of mind. But I will also remind people that, and I'll go into these stats if you're coming to the dinner later, that Western society is aging, which is a problem well above all of our pay grades. But over the last 30 years, the median age of a person in Canada has increased by 9 years. So That's a lot. I mean, as a percentage, that is a staggering jump. I will share, but without taking too much thunder from my presentation, the average age of a radio amateur over the same period of time has only increased by 7.2 years. So on the whole, we're actually not aging as fast as everyone else. It must be the RF. That's the only explanation I can think of. I'll get to you. Yeah, go ahead. Oh yeah, so it was 8 Canadian youth. There were 30 attendees from Canada, the United States, South America, and Europe, and they all had a great time. I have a question here from Jack Benz, VE3ZPW. With the increased frequency and severity of natural disasters along the Canada-U.S. border, what, if any, initiatives are occurring for cross-border cooperation? Now, the guy to answer that question is actually the guy behind the console at the back making sure this broadcasts. His name is Jason Tremblay, VE3JXT. He's RAC's ComServe officer. He has an equivalent in the United States, and for the life of me, I can't remember his name and call. Who's the ARRL? John Johnson? Who? ARRL ZEMCOM guy.
John Johnson, yeah.
So
K5MHD.
John Johnson, K5MHD from the ARRL, and we do coordinate when something happens on either side of the border. If something happens here, we get a phone call from the league, and if something happens there, they get a phone call from us. That does happen. There is a move to make those arrangements more formal, or as formal as you can, because no plan survives the battle with the enemy. So, anyhow, I hope that answers your question. Are there any other questions from the audience or from the multiverse?
Let me throw something out. A question? Somebody have a question?
Go ahead. So Brian, VA1CC, asked if the United States or Canada are looking at a more entry-level exam to get people into the hobby. Well, in the United States, you have the technician. For those of you who may not know, the U.S. has 5 levels of license. You have technician, novice, general, advanced, and extra. So the technician is as entry-level as you get. We don't have that equivalent. Dave, would you agree with me that our basic is closer to their general? So what Dave said is that our basic is the equivalent of the U.S. technician and general exams combined. So it is a higher step to get into the hobby. To answer your question, we have made a proposal, and those discussions are ongoing with the regulator. They are not necessarily opposed to it, but there are obvious changes to regulations are onerous. Changes to policy aren't, but that would require a rewrite of RBR4. Is it worth it? It might be, but that is something that RAC has been talking about for a while, and ICIT is aware of these discussions, and it's an idea that it hasn't been, they haven't said no yet, but we're still working on what it would look like, if that answers your question. You had something you wanted to say? Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that petitions that we submitted to the FCC, it has been 6 or 7, probably 6 years ago, was to even enhance more our technician license, which is the beginner's license, but we're trying to get them more frequencies and more data mode capability and voice capability on the band. So, and that's been pending before our regulatory agency for several years, and we're hoping that somehow, some way, some of these petitions will get decided on, but we think that will be a big enhancement for entry-level and technician licensees. I was going to mention, since we've got time, again, going along this notion of things that I think are important to consider when you look at the future, is I'll tell a story on myself, and looking at the age demographics in this room, maybe it'll impact you the way it impacted me. But I give a lot of speeches to schools, science clubs, things like that. And I went and talked to a large high school at their science club, And they had 2 or 3 hams in there, and they knew who I was, and said, man, you're the one that needs to come talk to us. So I got all fired up, you know, the way I usually do, talking to a group like that, and I did what I usually do that had been so successful so many years. I grabbed my QSL cards from Mongolia and all these places, you know, really nice, pretty ones, you know, and went in there and I was starting up the presentation the way I've done for many years, okay, showing them the DX QSL card. You can talk around the world, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And 5 minutes into that presentation, and I think I can read a group pretty good, you know, the nonverbals and all that, they weren't any more interested than a man in the moon with me. And I was sitting there going, this presentation has worked with young people for years. I can turn a group on talking about this, so what's wrong? I'm telling you, they weren't interested. They weren't interested in the cards. They weren't interested in my theme. I mean, I could tell I was losing this group real quick, so I had to make a decision. Do I keep going, which wasn't working, or do I just change? So I laid those cards down, and what did I do? I changed my whole presentation just off the cuff. So how did I change it? You know what I did? I started talking about the computerization of ham radio. I started talking about software-defined radios, Raspberry Pi, the Digimodes, things like that. And what did the group do? They started leaning up into their chair and their seat. They started leaning forward on their desk. They started listening. All of a sudden, they started listening because I changed the whole scenario of what my perception of ham radio was about. See, I wanted them to hear what had worked for so many years, but that's not what they wanted to hear. And so this old dog learned real quick after that presentation that things have changed. They've changed. And we've got to change too. We've got to change that message. And years ago, I don't know, maybe it was at Dayton somewhere, I made a presentation when the ARRL Forum and said amateur radio needs to rebrand itself. And I got crucified for saying that. But I wasn't wrong. I wasn't wrong. And I think we need to, us old hats need to think real hard about, and change doesn't come easy for my generation, for me, okay? But we've got to change the way we look at that next generation in the future, you know, if we're going to build our hobby, our avocation, and keep it going. So, y'all just remember old Rick, this old dog learned a hard lesson given that presentation.
So, and I'll get to you in a second. And I'm going to dovetail on that a little, but I can't say too much because that's actually the topic of my gala presentation at the keynote tonight. And I really don't want, y'all don't want to hear me to say the same thing twice, much less once. So I'm 43 years old. I was licensed 28 years ago. So versus him being, so I was licensed in 1994. He was licensed in 1967. So yes, things have changed. The amateur radio service exists for the purpose of innovation. The governments don't give us this spectrum out of the goodness of their hearts. And every major advance in RF technology has come out of this service over 125 years. Things change. The change is the expectation. But at the same time, I also woke up when I was exposed to the amateur radio service. You loved the idea that you could talk to someone anywhere, from the bottom of the Ozark Mountains around. With me, it was an HTX 202 VHF handheld, and the idea that I could talk on a repeater from Georgetown, Ontario to King City. There are differences, but there are similarities. If you're into this, you're a little quirky, you're usually technically able, and I don't think embracing change is as hard as most of us say it is. It doesn't have to be. Because half the fun of this hobby is all the really new cool stuff that comes out that we get to play with, and more of it's come out in the last, say, 10, 15 years than in the last 100 previous. So I'm not gonna go too much further because I don't want to steal my own thunder. Jason. Okay. So, um, there are different environment. The environments between Canada and the United States and amateur radio are obviously different. I mean, Canada's about on average 1/10 the size. What's that, Brian?
Would it infringe your presentation tonight to ask how AI is going to influence radio?
Brian was asking if if there was how AI is going to influence amateur radio. I haven't the foggiest idea. I don't. It will. I don't know what form that's going to take, but every technological advance has had an impact on the hobby. The computerization of amateur radio, so it will, and we will deal with that as it comes. So, but let's, Keith. So for the audience, Keith V7KW asked Rick about the symbol rate limit in the United States and whether or not that's where things are with that in the United States.
Yeah. That's the petition, Keith. That's the oldest that we've had before our federal agency is. That thing's 8 years old, I think, or 9. That's what we call the symbol rate petition. We're the only, if I remember right, we're the only country in the world that has such tight regulations with regard to data modes and emissions, okay? And we're still limited to that 300 baud issue and all of that. It's still pending. Now, the FCC has said within the last few months that they need to, and I forget the phrase now, revisit or refresh or something like there was a word like that a commissioner used and said, we need to refresh our look at that petition or something like that. Because we've had some congressional people ask some questions about why is it taking so long. So, and trying to get the thing moving. But yeah, it's still an issue because we're still restricted. And data modes right now, they're a hot item, obviously, new technologies and things. So hopefully we'll get our federal agency to take some action on that and loosen those regulations up.
So I mean, and that's one of the operating cultural differences between Canada and the United States. In the United States, you have 5 license levels, and there's so much you can do with each license level. You can only operate this, these modes on this part of HF if you're a novice, a general, an advanced, an extra, and then there's and whereas in Canada, if you have HF privileges, you have all of them. You can just operate wherever you want. And then again with the symbol rate. So in Canada, there's no symbol rate limitation. It's bandwidth. So if you can put through a megabyte per second of data in a 2 kilohertz channel, do it. In fact, you should probably patent it because you'll make a significant amount of money. Questions have been asked. What's going on in the United States? So culturally, in terms of the amateur radio culture post-COVID, what changes have you seen in how things are post-COVID? Like how are things going down there in general?
Well, I think whether it's because of COVID or whether it may be something else, maybe dealing with that age demographic issue that I alluded to earlier, but I think some clubs, like I said a few minutes ago, didn't make it through COVID, okay? We've had some big ham fest in America. They're no longer there. Now, whether or not COVID was the straw that broke the camel's back, as the old saying goes, I don't really know. And I'll tell you why I'm a little hesitant in blaming it all on COVID, is that this past year, when I went to 2 of the largest ham fests in the United States, I had people come up to me, and oddly I heard the same term used at both of these locations, and yet they were not near each other. where I had people that I'd known for many years, okay, that had been around for a long time. And I knew that they were leaders in their clubs or their local community, like with the Ham Fest. And they came up to me, and when we're talking about, hey, man, how things are going, blah, 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 I said, Rick, I'm tired. Now, what do they mean by that? I'm tired. Well, what they're telling me is they're tired of being president in their club for about the 5th time in the last 6 or 7 terms, okay? They're tired of being the Hamfest chair, you know, for the last 10 years or so. And they don't have anybody to pass the baton to. And this kind of leads into another issue that I think we've got a challenge facing us with, a void in leadership in amateur radio. And that's internationally too, Serge, I think, 'cause to some degree in the different regions is a leadership void. And so it bothered me, because these were people that I knew really loved ham radio, but they're saying, Rick, I'm just tired. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not going to run the Ham Fest. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to be president anymore. Brian, you and I were talking about that just a minute ago. Okay? You know, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm tired, but they don't have anybody to pass the baton to. So I think I have seen some clubs in the last few years, they've just sort of dwindled down to nothing because the leadership got tired and they ain't going to do it anymore. And then when COVID came, you know, I guess is the catalyst, so to speak, and nobody's willing to pick it back up, well, why can't we all meet on Zoom? Well, that's not the same as going and seeing buddies face to face, okay? And so the club just dwindled down to nothing. Some of these clubs have not gotten back to where they were previously. And certainly some of the ham fests that are gone, they just said, it's cost too much money, I don't have the time, and I'm tired. So oddly, in my president's report to our board at the July meeting, when I always write a president's report, I asked our own board, are you tired? Really, I did. I looked at the section, are you tired? Because it's easy to get tired, you know. But that goes to the challenge that I mentioned earlier, you know, about that next generation is if you don't have anybody to pass the baton to, how many times can you be club president before you get tired? Get my drift? So I think we're at a point, COVID or not, to where we've seen some real negative effects in clubs and Hamfest because of that. And then COVID may have been just a catalyst that furthered that along.
So here, along the same theme, absolutely. I mean, my own club was already suffering a little bit pre-COVID, and then COVID hasn't broken the camel's back, but he's limping. I know of clubs who had been established for years and years and years that failed. There is a little bit of a silver. I mean, there's a silver lining to anything. I don't know if it equals what's lost, but there is some positive out of COVID. I don't know if anyone, and again, I speak about Ontario just because that's where I live. The wonderful thing about being president of RAC is now I hear about stuff from everywhere else, which is really cool. But the Skywide Amateur Radio Club in Toronto, which had been a club in the 50s, died. In the 80s, and then during COVID, someone resurrected it, and they've got 35 members now. So things like that I have heard happening around Canada. I will also say that there are clubs. There are clubs that died, but there are also clubs that got bigger. There are clubs that innovated. They thought on their feet. There was enough fresh blood there that they said, you need to change now. What COVID did was going back to change and how change can be hard, it gave us a choice. You change now or you're cooked. You're done. Radio Amateurs of Canada, one of the things that we did out of the gate in March of 2020 was institute the online courses for the basic and the advanced, and that was I will take some credit for that because that was me as a member of the board saying we're doing this now. I'm not asking for permission, and thankfully, I mean Al Penny, VO1NO, our Atlantic director, and Dave E3KG, who at the time was our Atlantic director, who's now our regulatory affairs officer. These two gentlemen have put through. Well, so we've put 1,820 people through the basic course since March 2020, and we have put 500. 750 through the advanced course. So much so that, in fact, so for those of you who may not know, the advanced course Dave does if you're a Maple Leaf operator. And Maple Leaf operator subscriptions have increased 66% since March 2020 and have not dropped off. So those who have gotten the license, the membership upgrade, haven't just let it go because they've taken the course. So there are also other clubs I know of. Northern Alberta Amateur Radio Club, who they're going to celebrate their 100th anniversary 2 years late because of COVID. N Park in Niagara, Halifax here, 90 years. So there are clubs who picked up the baton and who figured out how to become stronger and came out of it stronger. I don't know how many, and we won't have we won't be able to give you any data for at least another couple of years on what that all means at the end of the day. How many failed, didn't come back, what that means to us. But there are those who did come out of it stronger. And I can only hope that when we finally put the data together in a couple of years, that it's more than we lost. But we do need to change. Again, I'm 43 years old. I got my ticket at 14 years old. I walked into a room at a police station in Georgetown, Ontario, with 30 people who were easily 25 years my senior. I'm 43 and I'm still the youngest guy in the room sometimes. So it is a concern, and it's one that we are working hard to address. But I don't care what age you are, I'll take you. If you want to come into the hobby at 60 years old or 70 years old, and I've seen those, welcome to my money pit. There's lots of room here for you, and I'm positive about our future because we have been doing this for such a long time. This club, the Halifax Amateur Radio Club, formed 90 years ago. Let's put that into perspective. 90 years ago was 1933. We were well into the Great Depression. And the club managed to not only form then, they have gone through multiple evolutions. I think we can get through this. I think we can fix this. If we are open to change, if we are open to continuing to break down barriers of access to the hobby. Financial access to the hobby is not, financially getting involved in the hobby, it's never been easier. You can buy a Baofeng handheld for $35. I couldn't do that 30 years ago, so that barrier is going away. As long as we keep telling people what amateur radio is, finding the ones who look at us and say, that's awesome, how do I get into it? Bringing them in, nurturing them, being part of their journey, I think we'll be okay. But it's incumbent upon us to figure out how we're going to do that. Sir. Hold on. Come here. I'm not going to repeat all that. I'll let you. You're going to say it better than I'm going to.
So I was saying that one of the things that they mentioned is that the hobby has a branding problem, and I fully agree. Like, I actually just kind of technically got into amateur radio over the last 2 years. It wasn't until I saw stuff like the Tech Prepper that I was like, oh, wait a second. This is a skill I need. Has there been any thought about how we could amplify some of those voices, the voices of people that are talking about emergency communications?
Well, he got into, we're seeing it's a branding issue, but he's on Tech Prepper. Is there anything we're doing to kind of rebrand along those lines?
Yeah.
What are you doing with the branding issue, I guess is the down.
Well, that's a real good question, because I do think we need to rebrand ourselves. I think if from the league's perspective, if I were to look back at all that we put out and the theme that we use with that younger generation, so to speak, and I like to call it, it's not just the younger generation, I like to think of it as the next generation, but obviously it's focused largely on youth, is it kind of goes back to, if you were to look at our publications, our communications from the league 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, and look at it over the last couple of years, you will see a direct change. You'll see a direct change in the messaging of the population that we're targeting, for example. You'll see a change in the kinds of articles that you see in QST and our periodicals. Of course, technology drives a lot of that. You've seen that shift to that next generation, as I would like to call it. Now, in terms of if we were to say we rebranded and we wanted to call it that as such, you're not going to see it. You'll see it as a gradual change. You know, let me give you an example. We still have complaints from people that we have too much stuff about vintage gear in QST. Yet, and we get that still periodically. But then we also get complaints. I'll get a complaint a week later and says, we need more information about those old radios and how to fix them, for example, you know? So you're darned if you do and darned if you don't. But finding that proper point, you know, can sometimes be a challenge. But yeah, I think to the extent that we would, quote, rebrand without necessarily calling it we've rebranded ourselves, there's been a definite shift in the message that the league has adopted over the last, I'd say, 2 or 3 years. You know, another thing too, this would be going along the lines of that next generation is we're getting rid of print. You know, we put in for a dues increase, and my email box, I've been through 2 dues increases with the league since I've been on the board. The last 2 times, you know, my email box lit up. This time my email box is not lit up. I got a few emails complaining, but you know, with the inflation that's out there now and everything, and with the new trend to go paperless and all, then I think that we'll have some members upset, but not nearly as I've had in the previous other 2 dues increases. But we're making that transition, that transformation to away from print. And that's sort of, I guess you could say, maybe a rebranding. You talk to the young people today, like our 2 boys, they're not really young per se, they're up in their 30s, but they don't want to see a magazine in print, you know? I mean, I was telling a story the other day to somebody. I said, we're out working on my big tractor, the John Deere, and I'm sitting there, where's my manual? My youngest son, he's the mechanic in the family, you know, I'm convinced he had my manual. You know, what'd you do with it last night? I'm getting mad. I want my manual. And he was already tearing something apart and everything, and I wanted my manual so I could look at it. He gets on his iPhone and he pulled it up on internet, the manual right there. He's got it and he's back already working on it. I'm still tearing the shop up looking for my manual, you know. But everything that kid, and he's a mechanical engineer, is on his iPhone. You know, this right here. They don't want a hard print magazine. So I guess that to that point, though, maybe that is part of that rebranding that we're making an effort to go to. But as far as preppers and things like that, you know, we've not focused on that necessarily. No, we just haven't. Maybe we should. You know, there's different pockets in the United States that are really heavy into that, but we haven't really focused on that population specifically. No.
And there's a difference between American preppers and Canadian preppers. The cultures are completely different. I'm going to just dovetail quickly on what he talked about print, and we're going to have to say final remarks and move on to our next presentation. RAC is also noticing the same, and we've seen a massive shift from the number of people who get a paper magazine versus electronic. We've seen a 20% increase in the number of people who just get the electronic magazine. Almost every new member gets the electronic membership. They don't get the paper membership. And it's going to become a problem even in 5 years from now. It's not going to be a matter of how much does it cost to get the magazine or the paper. It's going to be whether we can get the paper, because paper mills are going to stop making paper for print, and they're making paper for corrugated, because we get everything in boxes from Amazon now. And that's one of those problems in the background that no one really thinks about until it comes home to roost. So, you know, that's those questions. So I wanted to thank Rick again for coming, being at the meeting with us, having you for the past couple of days in-house, seeing you and Holly again. It was great to see you. Thank you for coming here. I'd like to thank everyone online and for those who are in the room who came to listen and who are interested enough in the hobby to want to know what's going on and what you can do to help make sure that it's here so that when we celebrate Halifax's 180th anniversary, there will be some record of what we talked about here, and they'll be able to see what we did, and they'll be able to compare it to what it was like back then.
And thank you, Phil, and again, congratulations to the Halifax Amateur Radio Club for the 90 years. That's fantastic, and I'll just leave you all with one last thought, because I like to do this in a lot of my presentations. I'll give you 3 challenges where you can do something over the next year. One of them is get somebody to become a ham radio operator. Everybody in here knows somebody. Go work on them right now and just get everybody in here and get one new ham. That would mean something. Second is go help another ham. A lot of us are aged now. We don't climb. We need help putting up antennas. Get somebody back on the radio. There's somebody you know, I bet, that is kind of gone by the wayside. Get them back on the radio. And the third thing is, if you're not a member of RAC, you need to see this guy right now. And everybody needs to be a member of their organization. So if I was back home in America, I'd be saying, you need to join the league, or get somebody that's not a member, get them to join. That's your charge over the next year. So again, thanks a lot for the hospitality extended to Holly and me. We really appreciate it, and thanks for letting us come up here.
Thank you, Rick. Rick and Phil, appreciate you coming out. I really appreciate the support we're getting from the federal, national, and I think Region 2 is in great hands with those 2 people at the leadership. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.